In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. As I have often done, I must ask us all to do a bit of time travel at the beginning of my sermon. What can I say? I like sci-fi. I ask us all to go back 19 years. I invite us all to think about the hours and the days immediately following the attacks of September 11th, 2001. It was a frightening time. We didn't know what was going to happen next. Fear and paranoia were rampant. The United States found itself led by a still pretty new and relatively untested president. One who had campaigned on a domestic agenda, but that was out the window now. On Friday, September 14th, 2001, that young president spoke to a nation in shock and to a solemn crowd gathered at the Cathedral Church of St. Peter and St. Paul, which is more commonly known as the Washington National Cathedral. The crowd was assembled there to remember those who had died in the attacks 3 days prior. On that day, the president spoke about how a crisis shows us who we are as a people. He said, "Adversity introduces us to ourselves. This is true of a nation as well. In this trial, we are reminded, and the world has seen, that our fellow Americans are generous and kind, resourceful and brave. We see our national character in rescuers working past exhaustion, in long lines of blood donors, and thousands of citizens who have asked to work and serve in any way possible. And we have seen our national character in eloquent acts of sacrifice." President Bush was quite right about that in those first days after 9/11. As for what happened in the months and years after, that's a different story. I was reminded of this speech by watching a new documentary that just came out on PBS about the presidency of George W. Bush, and also the recently released video in which he called for unity instead of partisanship during our current crisis. But the key message here is that adversity reveals character, our true selves. I think that is something that has been reinforced by our current crisis. When faced with a crisis or adversity, what are our immediate reactions? Our immediate emotions? On a deeper level, when faced with an adversity, how much do we really value justice? There are no easy answers here. As I thought on these deep topics, I was drawn also to today's reading from the book of Acts. Today's reading comes at the tail end of a very lengthy passage where Stephen, one of the first deacons of the church, was put on trial for Jewish authorities for blasphemy and sedition. In response to those charges, Stephen did not defend himself. Instead, he accused the religious establishment of failing to be true to their faith. Our reading today picks up with the response of those Jewish authorities and those gathered around. Mob justice. They take Stephen out and prepare to murder him. As they are taking him to be stoned, Stephen is blessed with a vision of the divine. And when he tried to tell the others about it, they refused to listen. In Stephen's final moments, he prayed for those who were preparing to kill him and asked that Jesus would receive his spirit. Here we can see a crisis of sorts for both sides. Stephen, this recent convert from Judaism to a new sect following a dead rabbi, has challenged the religious establishment for being unfaithful. This is a challenge for the religious elite. On the other hand, Stephen is facing persecution and then imminent death at the hands of an angry mob. Clearly a crisis. So how does each side react in the midst of such a crisis? The religious elite stand back and allow Stephen to be dragged away and stoned. Perhaps some of them even actively participating in it. Stephen, when accused of blasphemy, spoke truth. He took on the role of a prophet and spoke truth to power. And when faced with painful death, he did not beg for mercy. Instead, he followed Jesus' example and prayed that God would forgive them for their deeds. Stephen is considered to be the first martyr of our church, of the church. And the word for martyr in Greek also means witness. The job of all faithful people is to be witnesses, but not necessarily martyrs, thankfully. Stephen illustrates for us that being a witness isn't about making clever arguments. It is about sharing our own personal experiences of Jesus. Jesus called on all of his followers to witness to others to the ends of the earth. Stephen did that and ended up paying the price for it with his own life. Stephen's story is also important because of a character who is quite literally on the margins of the story. Saul. Today's reading told us that the crowd that gathered to stone Stephen laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. Stephen testified to the truth of Jesus, not to save his life, but so that others could see the light and be saved. And the Saul who bore witness to Stephen's sacrifice would eventually see the light and become Paul, the greatest of the apostles. One final insight regarding Stephen's final moments. He didn't give the people persecuting him what they wanted or what they expected. He didn't beg for mercy. He didn't say that they were right, nor did he fight them. He spoke the truth, too, even though he knew the consequences for doing that would be grave, just like Jesus did. This concept of unmet expectations is also central to today's gospel reading. The This passage should sound familiar to anyone who's ever attended an Episcopal funeral, as this is one of the common readings for that occasion. It's part of Jesus' farewell discourse, which are his final teachings to his disciples before his death in the Gospel of John. Just before this reading begins, Jesus had told his disciples that his time with them was growing short. Then, as our reading begins, Jesus tells his disciples to not be troubled. He told them to have faith in him and in God. Jesus promised that he was going to prepare a place for them in God's house, and that he would come back and take them with him. As usual, his audience didn't understand him. Thomas spoke for them and said he just didn't get it. Jesus responded very clearly, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Philip tested Jesus by asking to be shown the Father. Jesus responded in a mix of frustration and disappointment. "You still do not know me." He said that seeing him and seeing the Father are the same, because they are one. Jesus was trying to prepare his friends, his followers, for life after he was gone. But as usual, they just didn't get what he was saying. They wanted clear answers about where he was going, about what he would be doing, and where they would end up. Again, as usual, Jesus gave them and us no simple answers. Basically, what Jesus told them and tells us is that we all have to take it on faith. The next life is an impenetrable realm where God abides. We don't get to know the details. At least, not yet. Jesus is going ahead of us, and he is preparing the way. When the time is right, Jesus will come back for us and show us the way. Our gospel passage today features Jesus consoling his anxious friends about an uncertain future. We too face an uncertain immediate future. Jesus' message to his friends was to trust in him, to have faith in him and in God. We too should take that advice. The story of Stephen's sacrifice should compel us to consider our priorities. When faced with crisis or adversity, what do we do? Jesus tells us to have faith in him, to speak the truth, to advocate for justice and peace. And so, as we continue to face these difficult and challenging times, let us strive to demonstrate our faith in Christ and our character through our words and actions this day and all